The GOP tax bill that President Trump was bragging about passed last night, despite the fact that the CBO says it adds $1.4 trillion in debt. Now, Republicans have always believed tax cuts largely pay for themselves. They've also preached fiscal responsibility, and that's why their new tax code ran into problems when the nonpartisan Joint Committee on Taxation calculated that the amount of growth it generated would cover only a third of its cost. The GOP believes in the so-called supply-side theory of economics that was born 43 years ago this month, literally on a dinner napkin, when an economist named Arthur Laffer was having dinner with Ford administration officials, including Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld. Laffer drew a crude curve to illustrate his theory. Government spending doesn't stimulate demand, and heavy taxes and regulations can stifle the economy. On one end of what we now call the Laffer curve, the government taxes everyone at 0%, and so the government gets no revenue. On the other end, if it taxes at 100%, the same thing would happen. No revenues because nobody has any incentive to earn or to spend. Laffer concluded that lower taxes would spur the economy. His supply-side economics became a cornerstone of President Ronald Reagan's economic policy, resulting in one of the biggest tax cuts in history, and tax revenues soared thereafter. His napkin now resides in the Smithsonian. But critics still think the trickle-down theory of economics does not work. Joining me now, economist and former economic advisor to President Ronald Reagan, Dr. Arthur Laffer. Dr. Laffer, your premise is this: you tax something, you get less of it. Tax something less, you get more of it. But when you tax less, you don't necessarily create enough revenue to make up for the loss of revenue. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. That's very accurate. Sometimes when you raise tax rates, you collect more revenues. And sometimes when you raise tax rates, you collect less revenues. It depends on where you are on the, as you call it, the Laffer curve. But it's good to see you, Michael, again.
So the president just left the White House this morning en route to New York, and he proclaimed this the largest tax cut in history. But what about the cost? I mean, what about the fact that both the CBO and the Joint Committee on Taxation say that this is going to be a stunner with regard to the national debt?
They're wrong. They're just plain wrong. You know, what they do look at is economic growth, and that's true. And that's a huge improvement what the CBO used to do and what the Joint Committee on Taxation used to do as well. But what they miss, Michael, is they miss the behavioral responses. Companies are going to shelter less income. That has nothing to do with growth. There's going to be less tax evasion because it's not as profitable. Businesses are going to relocate their corporate headquarters in the U.S. and pay taxes here instead of in Ireland and elsewhere. And there are all sorts of secondary, tertiary, and quaternary revenues of income taxes, payroll taxes, Medicare, Medicaid taxes, excise taxes, tariffs. All of those will come in. And then the biggest killer of all, which shows them completely wrong, is that state and local taxes are going to rise enormously, even though there's no change in the tax rates at state and local levels. It's just a huge, huge windfall for tax revenues, frankly, over a 10-year period.
The president was similarly touting that the corporate tax rate will tumble from 35%. Maybe it goes to 20. He just said this morning that maybe it'll end up at 22. Corporations today are not suffering. I mean, the economy, by many different measuring sticks, is robust, maybe not with regard to wages, but you take a look at what's going on Wall Street right now. My question, Dr. Laffer, is this: why do those corporations at this moment in time need such a break?
Well, let me just say that Wall Street is in response to what is going to happen. Stock prices don't tell us what has happened. They tell us what they think is going to happen. And there's a huge rise in stock prices because people expect a boom in the economy, and that will inure to everyone's benefit. But when I look at these taxes, I think it'll spur economic growth. I think it'll do a good job. It could be a lot better bill than it is. But frankly, you'll get higher wages for those people who are currently employed. And the big one for me, Michael, is that people who don't have jobs now will be able to get jobs and have jobs. We, under Reagan, I think we created almost 20 million jobs under the Reagan bull market there because of the tax cuts primarily.
I gave you credit during the read into this conversation, Dr. Laffer. No, but let me finish this question because you might not be thanking me.
That's all right.
I gave you credit for the fact that Ronald Reagan followed your advice and that revenues increased, but part two of that is ultimately he then did have to increase taxes. And you
Sure.
know that critics would say that Bill Clinton, for whom I know you voted, I think twice, that Clinton and the tax increases on his watch actually belie the Laffer curve theory. Respond to both of those criticisms.
Yeah, let me do the latter one first. Bill Clinton was the biggest tax cutter of all, very close to Reagan and Kennedy, to be honest. He cut government spending as a share of GDP by almost 3.5 percentage points, more than the next four best peacetime presidents combined. Bill Clinton got rid of the retirement test on Social Security. He put in welfare reform. He had the biggest capital gains tax rate reduction in U.S. history. He exempted owner-occupied homes from capital gains taxation. I could go on and on. Clinton did raise the two highest marginal tax rates. That's true, and that's what everyone else focuses on, but that's minor compared to the really pro-growth tax cuts he put in, and that's why I voted for him. I didn't vote for him because he's a Democrat or Republican. I voted for him because he was a very good pro-growth president.
Okay, a third criticism that you're accustomed to responding to, Kansas. Sam Brownback did what the Laffer curve recommends. It didn't play out so well in Kansas. What went wrong?
Well, first place, it was Sam's tax cut, but I did go down there and I did think it was a good one. It was a $90 million tax cut on a budget of a little over $5 billion. It was a very small one. And then when they finally changed it around, the Senate changed it around and took away all the offsets Sam had, it became a $270 or $280 million tax cut. And then they had all sorts of increases in spending. And by the way, Kansas didn't do badly. With falling oil prices, falling agricultural prices, Kansas is pretty exposed to those types of events. And if you want them, though, the real truth, Michael, that's really, I think, proof of what happened in Kansas is in response to Sam Brownback's taxes in Kansas, Missouri cut its taxes because it was losing all their businesses in Kansas City, Missouri to Kansas City, Kansas. So flattery, I guess, is the best form of flattery is emulation, I guess, isn't it?
Here's my own version of it. Let me say, I hope you're right, because we've got a $20 trillion debt already, and we can ill afford throwing another trillion on top of that.
Right.
Thank you. Dr. Laffer, good to see you.